Hello everybody, I shan't subject you to a particularly long video today, mostly because I was able to, on this laptop, install an old game actually, a very old game, but a game which I haven't played in a while, so it felt new to me, called Axis and Allies. I should say that there were 3 issues I had with this laptop when I first got it, and I've now resolved basically all those issues. The first issue is there was no Ethernet port, and where my computer is actually quite far away from the Wi-Fi, so that was kind of annoying. Second issue is there weren't enough USB ports, and third issue was that there wasn't a disk drive. Now, I was able to solve the disk drive issue by just putting, whatever things I wanted to install via CD into, of which there aren't that many things, because let's be honest, I mean, it's not that common to install things. Basically, it was Civilization and then this game. Were the 2 things I ended up installing. But I just put them onto a different laptop, which did have a disk drive, put it onto a handy external hard drive. This external hard drive, that was the sound of a scented candle falling on the floor. This external hard drive, which also you will notice has this. And basically, if I were a slightly larger YouTube channel, I feel like I'd have to worry about like showing right up to camera a clearly branded product. But yeah, basically this is a external hard drive which has basically things which I don't need to use very regularly. And what that means is it basically has some stuff for installing. Like there's a few things I have which I need to kind of standardly or ordinarily install on whatever computer I might get. So those things which I need to install, I have them on here so I can plug it in and just install. But this also has all of my videos archived. This is the video, this is the thing where rather than deleting my videos, because I just worry, I don't like the idea of deleting my videos entirely. And I have this external hard drive, so I'm like, okay, I'll archive it. Now I have a second, bigger external hard drive, which has some other stuff on, and then I have a third, actually smaller external hard drive, which is my regular external hard drive. Anyway, the reason why I was showing you that little attachment thing is because that the thing I got this adapter for my laptop, and it is a USB to Ethernet adapter that also has 3 USB ports on it. So basically it turns 1 USB port into 3. And then it also came with an adapter to plug into the kind of smaller USB things. I don't really know what the word is, but again, I'm going to have to pick it up again. So expect another scented candle to fall on the floor. Yeah, this one, whatever that's supposed to fit. Basically, it had one of those. And I was like, okay, so I can just plug that into there. And now I basically have more USB ports than I know what to do with, which is great, because even on my old laptop, I had 3 USB ports, which means I would have to juggle stuff around, because I like to have my microphone plugged in. I like to use a mouse. I don't really understand anybody who could do like editing, on YouTube or anything like that without using a mouse, because, it's much easier to drag things and kind of have that control when you've got a mouse, I find. And then obviously if I'm using an external hard drive, that's 3 already. So if I want to say plug in a third or second, I don't know why I said third, if I want to plug in a second external hard drive, I have to unplug something. So it was always kind of annoying to move things to my, to the kind of archive hard drive, because I would have to unplug something. And, it wasn't massively annoying, but it just meant, okay, and usually it would either be my microphone or my mouse, but then I'd have to kind of remember. Oh, and also my microphone on my laptop didn't actually work it was an older laptop. Anyway, so essentially, as you can probably work out, that solved all of my issues. So now every issue has been fixed, but the point is that I finally got around to installing this Axis and Allies game. And not only is it entertaining enough to have, motivated me to dedicate a significant amount of time to it, but also it's a time time vortex. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for, but one of those things where you just like, you're playing it and then it's like the amount of time that goes is insane. Like, okay, because I know that people say like, oh, Civilization, you can be playing it. But to be honest, actually, I don't really know about that. Like, I've played Civilization for an hour and it's felt like a long time. This game, you play it for what feels like 5 minutes and it's been like an hour. And part of the thing that annoys me about it actually is that there's no way to kind of speed up the movement. So you are kind of just sat there watching things happen. But basically, the way it works, and I am actually, believe it or not, going to, via the route of discussing the mechanics of this game, get onto the topic of this video. So the way the game works, it's kind of like a cross between a very kind of macroscopic strategy game versus a very kind of microscopic game, in that like you basically have different areas you can attack and you can move your units to attack. I would show you footage, but the problem is I wasn't screen capturing when I was playing the game, and I'm going to try my utmost to not play the game for a very long time. Certainly at least until I'm significantly ahead of schedule with my kind of uploads, because otherwise it's just going to mean that every video I make is going to have to be this short. And yes, this video will be short. I know that I haven't even got to the point of the video right now and you're doubting me, but I'm quite confident this video will end up being reasonably short. Anyway, and it is kind of funny actually that I kind of have this idea in my head that whenever I upload videos to this channel, ordinarily I'm kind of like, well, it should be like about an hour of talking about stuff. And what's interesting is how often things do work out being about an hour of me talking about whatever it is that I want to talk about. But I would be very surprised if this ends up being an hour. Anyway, so you move things in, but then once that happens, the game loads up kind of an auto-generated battlefield, and, or, you know, like, I don't know if battlefield is the right word. It's got cities and mountains and forests and all that kind of stuff, a mini map. And basically the way it works is that then you actually have a much more substantial battle where you're like controlling all of these kind of smaller army groups that are going in to attack. And it kind of, you know, compared to, for example, obviously Civilization, which is the game which I play quite a lot, there is something sort of fun. You know, in Civilization, it's all macroscopic. It's building enough units, making sure that your city is productive enough to produce enough units. This game is, you know, a lot more focused on combat, and with that comes the fact that, you don't just like say, all right, fight, and then basically just odds determine the chances of you winning. No, you actually have like a lot of tactics in terms of moving your troops within this very kind of specific area to, you know, block people off or come up behind people, or, you know, you move troops, you kind of retire troops so they can have a rest, and you move a second wave in. And there's nothing more satisfying than when, because kind of like when you move an army or a group of troops away from combat, they kind of start recovering. And there's nothing more satisfying when you get kind of the perfect time situation where you've got one group of troops at the front line are just really starting to kind of like get tired, starting to buckle. So then you send them back, like, okay, retreat. And then you send your other group of like new, fresh, like fully rested troops forward, and they kind of like end up mingling past each other. But the consequence is that the enemy who's pursuing your troops suddenly comes up against this completely rested group of troops and just gets smashed, blown away. The other thing I like about it is it's not easy, you know, like, and I think the kind of fun thing about it is even when you do have everything on your side, you know, you can find yourself just getting overrun and really kind of screwed over. So that kind of adds like an extra level of you know, excitement to it. Because sometimes, I mean, like Civilization, it's good, but you do find yourself reaching a point where it's like the fact that it's all kind of out of your hands is just like, oh, you know, you have this big army, you just send them in. It can get a bit, nah. Anyway, so I like it. And the thing is, even though it does cause me to waste a lot of my time, but the interesting thing is, I've kind of like always thought to myself about, like, I like this idea of games where there's a very macroscopic version and then a very microscopic version. You know, it's very like very broad, but then also kind of very basic too. And, you know, I've thought, well, this should be a thing that exists for more than Axis and Allies, you know, this game, which of course is set in World War II. And I was kind of thinking, you know, really that the best way to do it, I think, would be that you have a game a bit like Hearts of Iron, but maybe slightly different in terms of where it's set. So rather than being set in entirely World War II, it kind of be World War One leading into World War II. And so basically the interwar period and both world wars. But the idea would be that you kind of have like a front line, and when you attack the enemy's front line, you basically then go into kind of the more direct, involved battlefield situation where you kind of send your troops in and basically, you know, do the whole fighting thing where you like organize your troops. And then basically, yeah, if you win the battle, then you end up moving the front line forward slightly. And in effect, you have to, of course, move the front line forward gradually in order to get to, you know, Berlin ordinarily. And obviously, you know, one of the things which I think should be a very kind of good test of any strategy game, especially a strategy game set in a historical scenario, is how likely is it that you can achieve actual real world history? So a good example of something which I think fails this is in World War II, in Civilization. If you actually were controlling Germany as a civilization in World War II in the exact same situation, then you would never ever experience what happened to Germany because of simply the mechanics of civilization, where basically, because obviously what Germany did is took over huge amounts of land, but then got slowly pushed back. And the thing is, that just doesn't really happen in Civilization, because there's kind of just always a certain tipping point where you just start running away with it. And also, even if you don't, you can always make peace while not making massive concessions in Civilization. Like, usually the maximum you'll be expected to give up in Civilization is one city. So if you were playing Civilization 4 as Germany, you could take over all of, like, you know, all the way up to Stalingrad, basically exactly as Germany did in World War II. But when it came to, like, the tide, if the tide even did start to turn against you, then you could just be like, okay, well, let's make peace. What's it going to be? And realistically, Russia would only ask for one city. So I've always thought that should be, like, you know, a good example of where playtesting would really help to make the game feel a bit more real. That's what I want to say. Where you wouldn't have this whole situation where it's like you're playing as Germany, but you know, you feel like this isn't reality. This isn't how it really is. What else was I going to say? Yes, but also I do think you could, you know, put this into other scenarios, because of course that's the thing I'm saying. I like this idea, and I've always kind of thought, like, I like the idea of, say, a time set in feudal period. You know, obviously people go say, oh, Crusader Kings, whatever. It doesn't really matter. The point is, the main thing about it that I like is the idea of kind of like, you could build your own castles and kind of like build your own defenses, and there's like a cost to it, but obviously there's kind of a benefit of it. And that's kind of the idea I like, because, you know, Civilization's great, but kind of like the scope of it means that you can't get a lot of specifics. And I like the idea of a game which kind of has that scope in some sense, but also specifics, and it has a situation where kind of the game mechanics change depending on what period you're in. So the game mechanics for this kind of feudal period would be very different from the game mechanics for, you know, like World War II. Like, you know, World War II is all about kind of having a very strict front lines and stuff like that. And this would be more like, you know, you go and you attack castles and in turn hope that your castles are not attacked. Yeah, I like that idea. Now, obviously, you know, what I think would be, you know, where would you begin it? And to me, I think the answer would be, well, you'd begin it looking, I mean, you could begin it with like caveman times, like you control, you know, but I think realistically, if we're trying to parallel it to actual civilizations, you begin it in the Bronze Age, going into probably like just before the Persian Empire. Like that would be your first main stretch that would be covered by a game, because that kind of covers what's generally considered like ancient warfare. You know, then you kind of get into like the sort of Persians and the Greeks, and it kind of gets a bit more intense. But like this is kind of, you know, if you imagine just like the time before things just went crazy, because, you know, with the Persians, things went crazy. You had like these massive armies just sweeping across huge amounts of land. I feel like things were kind of simpler back in the 700s, 600s, and of course before then. So yeah, I like that idea. And I was kind of thinking about the fact that obviously the way that armies worked back then is you would have big shield, big spear, and basically you would have two people, or rather two groups of people, which would kind of walk up to each other and stand about spear lengths apart, and then stabby stab. And essentially what would happen is each person would have the goal of trying to find somebody on the other side of that thing that they could stab. It would almost be worth me getting something so I could indicate stabbing better. Anyway, yeah, getting something they can stab over there. And of course, but also you have the goal of making sure nobody stabs you. So shield, using that, knocking spears out of the way with your own spear. And basically, my understanding, and I believe it's a correct understanding, is that prior to, well, in the very early stages of the battle, I say very early, the majority of the battle at the beginning would be very, very few people dying. And the reason for that is because a big shield is pretty good at defending, and kind of so is a spear. You can knock things out the way. And realistically, you're going into this battle with the adrenaline, with the energy, also with a very strong sense like, I don't want to die. So you're going to be very motivated to block everything coming your way. How many people realistically, you'd have to be pretty rubbish to die within like the first hour of a battle. Maybe even pretty rubbish to die within the first 2 hours. Because for the first hour at least, that motivation to not die should overcome any kind of sense of possible distraction or fatigue. Like, you should be able to just be like, you'll be looking at everything happening, you're like really focusing, and making sure nothing gets past. And obviously then what happens is, you're like looking around, it does start to fatigue you, the intensity of it, all that kind of stuff. And if you're maybe just an average kind of soldier, then eventually you might find you reach a point where actually, you get so fatigued that the desire to not die can't overcome it. You start to get fatigued and you miss a spear coming your way. If it's early on in the battle, you're not missing it. You see a spear coming your way, you knock it out of the way. But if it's like you're getting tired, you're hot, and a spear comes your way, and you go to, maybe you don't even notice it, but you go to maybe avoid it, and you're just not strong enough, and it gets you right, somewhere that will kill you, and you die. Or you get injured, and you fall back, you go, Anyway, and essentially, what will happen then is after maybe an hour or two of battle, you will get the people to whom that starts to happen. And slowly, the line will break, and one side will end up retreating, and eventually perhaps even go into a full rout, and then lots of them will die. And lots of prisoners might be taken too. I'm kind of ignoring chariots and cavalry, but obviously they could flank, and that's something which I was going to mention in a second. Anyway, now I actually do find that, of course, it's a very interesting situation, because that was basically battle in the ancient world. And also, going on for a while, basically you could say before gunpowder really started to emerge, that was basically how battle worked. Two sides would stand such that they realistically could not so they were far enough away that they would actually not just be constantly being stabbed, but far enough away that you'd have to actually thrust to stab somebody. And I'm aware my chair's squeaking. I haven't rooted out an Allen key yet to sort it out. Anyway, two sides standing far enough away, and then eventually one of them would slowly give away as fatigue set in. There's a few kind of interesting things about this. Of course, one question is, obviously, this is very different from what you tend to see in TV. And actually, I will say this, okay, so one of the things I was thinking is that obviously I think if there was therefore a major game mechanic that you would want in a kind of game that was supposed to be set, a military strategy game that's supposed to be set in the ancient world, I think the most significant game mechanic you would probably have is one that's basically, at what point do you surge forward? Because of course you have to make a judgment of how well is your army doing. Do you surge forward? And to be honest, you could even have an element where a big part of it is how do you retreat? making a judgment on that, where, yeah, the main kind of feature of it would be sort of making a judgment on how well things are doing, because, or how well things are going, because, yeah, definitely, you know, in some sense, you could make an argument that actually the strategy of it, once the two sides are very close to each other, the only variable in terms of strategy maybe is kind of the cavalry or chariots, because apart from that, it's just going to be two sides facing off against each other. You know, there's not really any room for fancy maneuvers, and of course that's the thing that everybody mocks about things like 300, where it's all, oh, we're like a unit, we do, but obviously the thing is, what you don't see is what probably actually happened, which was just two sides going stabby, stab, stab for like 2 hours, and then eventually slowly giving way. That's not exciting. And yeah, that is true. So I do think it would be interesting to consider how one could make those kind of battles entertaining to watch. I was thinking in a TV show, it would actually work quite well. I've mentioned before the idea of my enthusiasm for the notion of making a TV show about the Bible, and like really kind of getting involved in it and like properly like having, you know, basically the entire narrative play out and then some. And something I've always thought is that you could actually, you know, with the episodic format, you could make it so the battle kind of starts at the end of one episode, and then you start the next episode with the closing period of the battle when one side starts to give way. And that way you don't really, you know, you save money because you don't have to show the whole battle, but also it ends up kind of interesting because you don't show just the massive, long, extended period of just not many people dying as two sides just shove spears at each other, motivated by the desire not to die, to avoid or effectively avoid getting stabbed. So, you know, you only end up with a bit at the end where people are really starting to tire. And, you know, I think that's a good way. But yeah, I certainly think no matter what, I just don't think there's really an excuse for making things less historically accurate just because, like, oh, it's interesting. I was like, yeah, sure, but if you're fundamentally lying about, like, how wars worked, then maybe we just shouldn't have, like, I agree that actually the reality of war, certainly in the ancient world, is that it just wasn't that exciting. And maybe that's an indication that the idea of making war films about the ancient world is a silly exercise to begin with. Now, obviously, you can still have films with war in them, but I think, you know, something like 300, where the whole point is, oh, look at the wars, and you know, okay, I get it. I get like the whole thing about. I'm not one of those people I actually think 300 is a pretty good film because of like the propaganda aspect. Like, I like the idea that it's basically ancient Greek propaganda, and you know, it kind of knows it is, and that's like quite an interesting thing in terms of like the meta narrative. But it's obviously kind of ridiculous in terms of just how much it's being detached from the reality of how war would have worked back then. So yeah, I think in theory it should be possible, but I mean the main thing I guess would be not having the battle be this big central thing, because yeah, battles usually, if they're fought in an accurate way, aren't necessarily going to be that like dynamic and just like all of these different things going on. It's going to be quite a long drawn out period of just mostly just one line gradually moving another line. But obviously what you can have therefore is make it interesting by looking at the kind of surrounding context around the battle, the people involved, the politics and all that kind of stuff. Anyway, so let's get to the point of the video. If you know that this is how battles work, what you're going to realize is that actually there's going to be some people who are just better at this. You know, there are going to be some people who do just have more energy, more stamina, more alertness and awareness. And it's not going to be hard to know who those people are. You're going to quickly realize, oh wait, there's some people who are just much better at this than other people. And with that said, you could make it so that you are surrounded by those people who are very good. And in doing so, you could pretty much guarantee you won't be hit. And I think that's the reason why, in the ancient world, kings were so often able to fight up front with their troops without really risking their life. Because if the main reason why people die in wars or battles is because of fatigue, is because of getting tired, because, you've been doing it for so long, you've been stabbing and parrying and all that kind of stuff for so long. If you just surround yourself with people who don't get tired, the people who actually just keep up the energy, and these people keep up the energy, and you promote the people who you notice keep up the energy, you can just have a steady circulation of people around you, soldiers around you, who have basically the ability to just remain very, constantly alert, just always able to parry and all that kind of stuff. And it means that you, as somebody surrounded by those people, are pretty much guaranteed not to die. And I feel like that's something which is often ignored about kings in the ancient world. The fact that actually they wouldn't have been very likely to die. And of course, I said I'd mentioned cavalry. You could say, well, because I guess the point I'm making is there isn't actually that much uncertainty in ancient battle. Like, sure, maybe somebody could get a lucky shot in, but actually, realistically, if the main reason why people die is because of fatigue and a lack of alertness, then surrounding yourself by people who show reliable stamina and alertness, you're not actually leaving very much up to chance at all. And that's why I think many kings would have felt quite secure being up front. And, I think people might ponder when they see battles portrayed in the media that seem incredibly disorganized and hectic. They'd say, well, surely the king's just going to get, is really risking his life in the middle of all this. But actually, if it was as it actually was, then it's not really a risk at all. I mentioned cavalry and chariots. This is actually an advantage of the king being in the center, because cavalry and chariots can only attack the flanks. So cavalry is not going to be able to ride right in front of an entire army, along them, just so it can get up to the king and shoot him, because the cavalry will get shot with an arrow or hit with a javelin or whacked with a sling. There's just, I don't think that obviously cavalry adds an element of randomness because they can dart about all over the place, but realistically they'd attack from the flanks, not right into the center, because that would be a silly thing to do. Of course, they might charge the center, but if they charge the center, then the fact that you have the biggest, strongest, most well-drilled people around you is a massive advantage. And of course, if the battle starts to go the wrong way, where is it going to start buckling? Where's the line going to start buckling? On the flanks, around, where there's the less skilled soldiers. And meanwhile, your kind of personal elite bodyguard, who you've selected to be the strongest of people, least likely to buckle, going to be the last people to buckle, can say, oh wait, something's up here, let's get the king back. And they could, withdraw you. So actually, you were pretty much safe. It was just, you were just fine. I wanted to mention this elsewhere because I didn't mention it, and I think it's kind of cool. What I like actually is the idea that in ancient battles, before you got to the battle, you would have to have your shield in front of you, and you would just get a barrage of just javelins and projectiles at you, and you just run forward. I think that would be an exciting thing. I think that's probably, I guess that's what I'm saying. So the beginning of the battle would be very exciting because you run in, and you might say, well, the king would be at risk then, but I don't really know. I mean, I think that I'm not sure what would have been the obvious way for a king to avoid the risk of just being hit by a stray javelin or something like that. It could be, of course, I mean, realistically, if you're shield up, not that many people would have been getting mowed down by these projectiles. So I guess maybe that's why the king could feel reasonably safe. But the point is that the beginning of the battle will be very exciting, but then you get up front and it's reliable, it's predictable, you just shield up, spear, parrying, and when things start to go wrong, the king can be like, all right, I think I've worked out what's happening here, probably should clear off. And that's why I don't think it was massively brave for kings to stand at the front of the battle and fight. And I don't think it should surprise us that they were able to routinely not die, and that actually, there wasn't really much of a risk attached to being a king right in the middle of the front lines, because you're surrounded by the people who are the best people to be defending you and, blocking and parrying and all that kind of stuff. So there's not really, that certainty means there's not much of a risk at all. And of course, as soon as gunpowder gets introduced and there is actually a genuine risk to just being hit by a random stray bullet, it seems like all the rulers of the world suddenly got markedly less brave. I don't think that's a coincidence.